In the last couple of lessons, we identified our target audience, recruited them, and conducted interviews. In this lesson, we'll discuss how to debrief and synthesize user interviews into clear, valuable insights. This is a critical step in the process of refining user value, but it's also the easiest to overlook. Even if you've done all the previous steps correctly, you can still stumble at the final hurdle. Unless you synthesize those interviews into clear takeaways that you can use to refine the user value, all the time you've spent so far will have been wasted. There are 3 types of problems PMs face when they don't synthesize their interviews into clear takeaways. First, they might either validate or invalidate hypotheses based on a small subset of memorable answers, rather than analyzing all interviews collectively. Let's look at an example from Blue Apron, a meal kit delivery app. Blue Apron used to require at least a week's notice to skip an upcoming order. Otherwise, the user would automatically be billed for the following week's meal kit. During user interviews, one user spent a long time emphasizing their belief that there should be a longer cancellation window available. Their strong feelings might bias the Blue Apron PM towards prioritizing this. However, if they were the only user bringing it up, it might not be worth pursuing. The second problem is that they might generalize learnings that only apply to a subset of the population. For instance, Grubhub might have heard 3 users say that their service is too expensive. Based on that, they might tell the pricing team that they should reduce prices. But if they debriefed and synthesized the information correctly, they would see that only users under 25 and living in college towns felt this way. This means there's an opportunity to provide differential pricing for this audience segment, or even define them as an anti-audience and focus on working professionals over 25 instead. The third problem is that they might miss patterns that would allow them to reach deeper insights. For example, a PM at Peloton might interview 2 different audiences: users who have purchased their hardware and users that only use the app. If users across both audiences said they wanted strong integration features with fitness tracking apps like Strava or Fitbit, then it's the PM's job to take a step back and identify this as a common theme regardless of audience segment. A PM who doesn't do this synthesis may miss the opportunity to incorporate this learning into their design and development work. This is why it's important to invest time in translating raw insights into a synthesized user value map. There are 2 phases to this process: debriefing and synthesis. Debriefing happens immediately after each interview, which allows you to identify the most important insights while they're still fresh in your mind. It also provides an opportunity for you to switch up your approach to the next interview based on what you've learned so far. Synthesizing happens at the end of the entire interview campaign. This step allows you to look across all your interviews, identify patterns, and answer the initial questions you had from your hypotheses when you started the exercise. Let's break down each of these processes, starting with debriefing. After every interview, you should spend a few minutes writing down what you just heard. This allows you to begin identifying new insights, as well as incorporate lessons learned from the previous interview into the next one, ensuring each interview is more valuable than the last. Debriefing has 4 steps: document the user profile, document observations from the interview, extrapolate insights based on observations, and evaluate the interview process. You can reference the Debrief tab of the Refine User Value template to follow along as we walk through this process. Let's start with documenting the user profile. It's important to verify who you've spoken to and what attributes they have from your target audience. This will help you group responses based on user attributes, which will help you identify patterns later on. Next, you'll document observations from each interview. These observations should be about the user problem itself and how the user experiences that problem. Above all, you want to make sure you understand what problem each user faced. This means asking, if the problem was different, how was it different? What alternatives did they use to solve the problem? Why did they use those alternatives? What goals are they trying to achieve by solving the problem? Answering these 4 questions allows you to verify if the observation either supports the hypothesis, contradicts the hypothesis, or introduces a new hypothesis. Next, you'll want to extrapolate insights based on your observations. The goal of this next step is to translate the surface-level observations from the last step into something more meaningful and specific to your project and its objectives. You can translate observations into insights for 3 categories: problem takeaways, severity takeaways, and alternative takeaways. After you've debriefed the content of the interview, you should evaluate the interview process itself and determine how to proceed. This helps you improve your interviews so that you get deeper and more meaningful insights each time. If you don't take the time to evaluate your interview process and adjust if necessary, you're likely to make the same mistakes, face similar challenges across interviews, and encounter diminishing returns. After completing an interview, you can decide to do one of 3 things. 1. Don't change anything. This normally happens when you're early on in your research and haven't yet reached saturation on your questions. You don't want to change anything right now if things are going well, because there's likely more to be learned from your existing plan. 2. You can adjust your questions. This can happen when you've reached saturation on a particular question, meaning you're hearing the same thing over and over again from users and aren't learning anything new. 3. You can stop interviewing. Maybe you're hearing the same things consistently, and you don't think you're going to hear anything remarkably different or gain new insights from continuing to have additional conversations. For example, if you've heard from 4 participants that they have the exact same concern about something, participants 5 and 6 aren't likely to yield new insight. Let's go through a debrief exercise using some illustrative responses from users that the PM at Gusto might have interviewed. Check out the visual here if you need a reminder of the initial user value hypothesis the PM defined with their manager. Pause the video and review these interview notes from a conversation with Brandy, a CPO at a growing startup. Then answer these 3 questions. How do these responses compare to the initial problem hypothesis? What might you extrapolate from these responses? How, if at all, would you change your interview approach? Let's start by answering the first question. Brandy's responses indicate that Gusto was right to hypothesize that growing businesses have a ton of setup to do when onboarding new employees, and that it can be easy to make mistakes. The team can also extrapolate a few key takeaways from Brandy's responses. A problem takeaway is that the mistakes made include data entry errors as well as missed deadlines, a problem the team hadn't previously highlighted in the user value map. In terms of severity, Brandy's experience of missing a deadline, which resulted in an employee not having benefits for the first month of work, shows us that this type of mistake can be particularly severe. This might indicate a high willingness to pay for a robust solution. In evaluating their interview approach, the team might choose to probe for deadline tracking in future interviews to understand how big of a problem this is and for whom. This will enable them to determine whether or not this is an issue worth prioritizing in feature design. Now let's answer the same 3 questions using an interview Gusto conducted with Joseph, the founder and CEO of a seed-stage startup. How do these responses compare to the initial problem hypothesis? What might you extrapolate from these responses? How, if at all, would you change your interview approach? Let's start with observations. Joseph's interview surfaced a new hypothesis. Storing sensitive employee data is painful and an important aspect of an onboarding tool. We can extrapolate problem and severity takeaways from these observations. The problem may be larger in scope than the team initially anticipated, including not only data entry but also secure data storage and work authorization verification. Joseph's work authorization mistake in particular indicates that the consequences of these onboarding mistakes may be more severe than originally expected. This is a high-severity problem. In terms of evaluating the interview approach, one adjustment the team would likely make is to start asking questions about securely storing employee data and managing work authorization after hearing about these problems from Joseph. After you've completed and debriefed all of your interviews, you need to synthesize your learnings across all interviews to effectively answer the questions you set out to answer. If you don't synthesize across interviews, you could end up generalizing anecdotal evidence from your most vocal participants, as opposed to identifying trends and patterns. You could also find yourself cherry-picking responses to fit your narrative or hypotheses, as opposed to learning new things from your users, even if they disprove what you believed initially. We'll introduce a 5-step process to synthesize your learnings. To guide us through this process, we'll refer to the Synthesis tab of the Refine User Value template. The first step is clustering based on the problems faced by users. This helps you see the frequency of different problems that users faced and whether those problems were similar or different to those you hypothesized. Generally, you want to take a closer look at the problems most frequently mentioned by users and determine the root of those problems. This helps you add additional nuance to the problem description and the reasons behind the problem. After you've identified the problems to focus on, you can look for patterns across user profiles. This helps you understand if only certain user profiles experience a problem or if all groups of users experience a similar problem. You can ask yourself questions like, did different user profiles experience different problems or have different goals? Do different user profiles experience the problem at different frequencies? Do different user profiles experience the problem at different levels of severity? After you've established user problem combinations, you can identify patterns across alternatives and severity. This helps you understand which problems are more severe across user groups and how well the alternatives they use are working. You can ask yourself questions such as, are some problems more severe than others across different user profiles? What causes the difference, or delta, in severity? Do some problems have more or better alternatives? Let's return to our Gusto example to practice clustering users and identifying patterns based on the illustrative responses we shared. In Joseph and Brandy's interviews, we heard about data entry mistakes, missed timelines, and data storage security concerns. Brandy and Joseph represent two different user profiles. Brandy already has HR systems, while Joseph does not. These problems show up in different ways for these two types of users. For those with existing HR management solutions like Brandy, the most severe problems are data entry and missed timelines. Secure data storage isn't much of a challenge because the existing tools provide this functionality. Meanwhile, users like Joseph, who don't yet have HR solutions, struggle primarily with missed timelines and secure data storage. These problems are high severity, and the existing manual approach doesn't offer solutions to these challenges. Now that you've identified key problem clusters, profiles, and patterns, the next step is to complete your user value map. This map should capture the refined hypotheses for how users will get value from your feature. Start with the hypotheses you gathered in your manager briefing and make updates to each based on the insights you extrapolated from your user interviews. Let's complete the user value map for Gusto. As a reminder, here are the user profile and user problem hypotheses we landed on in our manager briefing. Pause the video here. What changes would you make to these hypotheses based on your insights from user interviews? What additional detail would you add to help your team hone in on a solution? Let's start by refining our user profile and user problem hypotheses. The biggest change we need to account for here is adding in the user problem around secure data storage. We can also add some more information about the severity of this problem and the alternatives that exist today. The updated map might say, through conversations with potential customers like Joseph, the team realized that this feature could help both current Gusto users and non-users. The team was also able to hone in on specific individuals that would benefit most from this feature, namely founders and other executives who are growing their teams. For user problem, the team validated the pain point around making mistakes and got more specific about the common types of mistakes, data entry errors, and missed deadlines. They also identified a new problem, concerns around personal data storage. Across all of these problems and multiple user types, the team found that severity was high and existing alternatives were limited. After refining the user profile and user problem hypotheses, the team decided to slightly update their user goal. Instead of just focusing on efficiency, the feature should create a secure and efficient onboarding experience. The final step of Synthesise is to reevaluate the project based on your conclusions. If the conclusions you reached in the last step support or add value to your user value hypotheses, then you should continue exploring the problem and move on to refining the business value. However, if the conclusions contradict your hypotheses or disprove key assumptions, you should reevaluate if this is the right problem to be working on, or if other problem hypotheses might be more relevant and impactful for the business. If this is the case, you can bring a few options to your manager. You can conduct another short round of interviews to prove a new hypothesis. You can stop working on the problem altogether and move to a different project, or you can proceed with a refined view of a new problem. When bringing these options to your manager, you should have a recommendation on how you want to proceed and why you want to proceed that way. For the Gusto example, the conclusions reached indicate that this feature has the opportunity to deliver real value to the target user. Since their user value hypotheses were largely supported, all signs point to continuing the project. This completes our interview process, which helped us validate our initial user value hypothesis. In the next section, we'll explore how to validate our business value hypotheses.